make sure you click.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome again. My name is Steve Gruber. I'm your moderator. I'd like to thank our Raleigh Course 360 office for being the host of this event around how resilient is your technology environment. More or less, to boil it all down, how recoverable are you? And are you recoverable? That's really the message today, is really understanding what's critical, what's not, and how do you architect a disaster recovery or business continuity, what we like to say today, a resiliency type of solution that you can bet your business on if all of a sudden you find yourself operating off script. And that's really what we're all about at Rescue Services, is providing solutions, specific solutions around what you already have in place today, how to leverage your own technology, your own infrastructure to build in resiliency and recoverability. But again, I'd like to thank all those that are in attendance today. We hope this is informative. We're going to kind of go in kind of a rapid fashion style, try to make it very interesting, but at the same time, want to make sure that at the very end of our session, you have an opportunity to present your questions to us. A lot of us are very experienced in the area of disaster recovery and business continuity. Combined within the Rescue Services Group, we have well over 100 years of actual support as well as industry experience. And you know, we've seen a lot over the years, and if you think a disaster is not imminent, as someone once told me, it's not a question of if, it's really a question of when. And looking back at disasters in the past, really you have to look back and think about things that occurred even back as far as 1992 from Hurricane Andrew and the flooding in downtown Chicago, scrolling through all the way up to the latest disaster, or the largest regional disaster that occurred just in September of 2012, which was Hurricane Sandy, which really was interesting because that debunked the whole idea of working from home, because there was no power in which for people to use in their homes to actually do their work, because once the power was out, obviously all connectivity was lost as well. So we've learned a lot along the way, from an office tower in downtown San Francisco that had a fire below grade, where all the employees had to be evacuated, and the entire building was off limits for over 3 weeks while they did a cleanup, because the smoke contained from that fire had PCBs in it. So again, it's not a matter of if, it's really a question of when. We also had a student loan organization that was taken out by the wildfires in San Diego not too many years ago, and they actually had to operate in one of our facilities for over 3 months. As well as here in Georgia, right in our own backyard in Americus, Georgia, I can remember Sumter Regional, which the whole hospital had to be evacuated in the cloak of darkness because a tornado had torn through there in March, essentially destroying that hospital, and those 80 patients had to be actually evacuated from that hospital to other locations in the area, and again, lost all power. And that hospital today, unfortunately, or fortunately for the folks in that area in Americus, are now operating, that hospital is operating as a Phoebe Putney owned asset and owned hospital. So again, things change. Hopefully you're going to find the information we're providing, again, rather exciting, as well as give you some thought-provoking thoughts about how to architect and how to make your infrastructure more resilient. But again, I'd like to thank you. I know everyone's time is very valuable. I'd like to turn it over to Tony Klinger. Tony's been with us for quite some time, formerly with IBM. Interesting about Tony, he's director of our solutions architecture here at Rescue Services. He has the opportunity to work with vast customers and clients that do many different types of solutions, or are looking for very cost-effective ways to either reduce the cost of disaster recovery or implement solutions which they've never really had in place before relative to resiliency and recovery. So at the end, we'll wrap up with, again, as I mentioned, kind of an open session for you to type in your questions and submit questions. Tony's session is going to run about 40 minutes. So Tony, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Steve. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your time. So I'm going to quickly run through some slides here around who Chorus 360 is and how Rescue Services plays into that. So really, Chorus 360, being our parent company, is focused on delivering infrastructure solutions, recovery, and professional services that help organizations reduce cost and increase efficiencies. So, I mean, whether that's providing hardware at time of disaster to coming up with disruptive technologies to finding a short-term project manager or networking resource to provide a professional service around a project that you might have going on. So where Rescue Services fits into the Chorus 360 model, the Advanced Technology Group is focused on delivering full service solutions, whether that's hardware, software, or professional services to do the implementation of those assets, the hardware or software. IT staffing or people as a service is purely focused on resources, IT resources to help customers and prospects deliver needs, whether that's again a short-term project or a long-term implementation or even a full-time CIO type position. And then Rescue Services is what we're going to talk about here today, and talk about how do we deliver disaster recovery, business continuity, and business resiliency for your infrastructure. So just to, again, quickly, the Chorus 360 brand, and if we mix together a lot, Chorus 360 or Rescue Services. I mean, Rescue Services is, again, focused on the delivery, disaster recovery piece of the Chorus 360 practice. So here's just some of the rewards that we've gotten coming out of the Chorus 360 and Rescue Services partnership there, or relationship. I'm going to talk more about the locations as we go through in just a minute, but our primary recovery center here in Norcross is 30,000 square foot of space. The entire downstairs area of this facility is dedicated to customers and disaster recovery and business continuity. There's 150 workgroup recovery seats here. As you see in the bottom left picture, it's designed for customers to bring in a call center, to bring in support staff, to bring in really anything that you need, whether it's an IT staff or a business unit that needs somewhere to land. And to Steve's point earlier, when a disaster happens and Sandy or something of that magnitude that takes out the power and you need spots to land people, we have that capability here in Norcross. We also have the access to provide mobile recovery units with generator, satellite internet, and connectivity that we could put a couple racks worth of hardware into and ship out to a facility or a location of your choosing to give you that same business continuity or work group recovery capabilities at your facility or your location. Offices and recovery centers, again, you'll see the ones in red. These are the primary recovery centers that we have. Facility with raised floor in all of the red locations. Everything that's listed in blue with a yellow star, those are business offices, points of presence that we have throughout the U.S. as well as in the U.K. for ATG, Rescue Services, and People as a Service there. So everything that we can do, obviously out of headquarters we have resources in all of these other facilities to provide the same capabilities. So just to kind of show we're not just in the Southeast, we are somewhat regional, but our primary focus and our primary business is in the Southeast with that. So with Steve's point about disasters and when is a disaster going to occur, we're going to go in a little bit deeper here around disaster recovery and business continuity and how to leverage your existing technology, what Rescue Services can do to help you improve recovery times while keeping the cost to a minimum. I guess one thing I'll show in that picture, on that slide there was a picture of all the cars in the snow trying to get out, and I think about customers who are using tape-based recovery and putting their tapes offsite at an Iron Mountain or recall, and you think back to the snowstorm that we had a couple years ago, or has it only been a year now? A little over a year ago here in Atlanta, where it basically shut down the entire city. If you had a disaster at your facility and you're in this kind of situation where the roads are gridlocked or locked up, you're not going to be able to get your tapes off-site to a recovery location. So as we talk about some of these solution options and these different features that we offer, think about your tapes being at a recovery center or at an off-site facility and you trying to transport those to a recovery center at time of disaster. That's really what Rescue Services, as the evolution of the DR strategy, has gone from we'll figure it out when it happens to we have tapes off-site to now how do we have that data pre-staged and available so that when a disaster occurs, we're not waiting a long period of time to get our data to a recovery site or waiting on hardware to get to us because of a decision that was made based off prior recovery time, recovery point objectives that may or may not be able to be met with the current solution. So Rescue Services is really focused on being a full service disaster recovery provider. Go into more detail in some of these areas as we go forward, but everything from business impact analysis all the way down to testing to full-scale disaster to work group recovery. To articulate that point, here's just kind of a little diagram of how we are a full service provider. Again, look at the recovery piece of it, whether talk about quick ship, us shipping hardware to your facility, and that's really where Rescue Services got its start. We were a hardware quick ship vendor, and we can still do that today, but we've had customers grow in their maturity of disaster recovery to go from, hey, ship us hardware so that we can do recovery in 3 days and 5 days and a week, to now customers are saying, well, we need to bring our tapes and come to you. That while that drives down the hardware deployment and setup time, it still has a long recovery time because you're waiting on those tapes to get here. To now the new evolution of that is around resiliency and disaster recovery as a service, and you'll see in that circle over there the shared hybrid solution. This is where, and I'll go into more detail in just a minute, but this is where we'll dedicate hardware on our side to allow customers to replicate their data to our floor, quote, in the cloud, and pre-stage it prior to a disaster occurring so that you're really prepared. Your recovery times and your recovery points begin to significantly drop because you've eliminated physical hardware transmission, whether that physical hardware is tape or if that physical hardware is actually system, servers, disk, infrastructure. Protection areas, backup as a service, data vaulting. We have the ability to provide managed service offerings to help customers leverage our relationships with some of the bigger data protection vendors to be able to help you secure your data offsite and give you that cloud resilient capability. Talk about validation and testing. Should you say, I'm curious about Rescue, but I want to test and see how this really works, and I want to make sure that what Rescue says they can really do. That could be as simple as shipping us 1 or 2 or a collection of your tapes. We'll do a one-off kind of solution for you, a statement of work that says we're going to provide X amount of hardware in order to facilitate that recovery. We allow customers to do recovery on our floor for 1 full week, so 5 business days on our floor. The hardware assets are dedicated to you during that time, so you don't have to feel like you're on a 72-hour clock or a 48-hour clock like you would with some of the other DR providers. Again, the point there with the testing and the one-off kind of thing, you can do a proof of concept testing with an upfront statement of work that'll allow you to come in and vet the solution and vet the options prior to signing a monthly recurring contract with us. Optimization, and just briefly, Power Cloud here, we've got a power system infrastructure to facilitate AIX and I-Series system recovery. Go into that in just a little bit, but we can do anything from an LPAR on our floor with continuous data protection, which is be a warm standby type thing where it can do a roll swap or a hot failover, down to you can do an offsite vaulting, or you can ship save 21s to us and have some offsite data recovery capability. And our power infrastructure is big enough that we can run multiple LPARs for multiple customers concurrently. We don't have to have a single piece of hardware for every customer in that area. So as this screen populates, just kind of, it's another view of the last slide. As you look at it, if you look at the bottom left and you recognize the consulting assistance piece here is the foundation to all of the solution stacks. Anytime that I'm working with a customer, it's critical to understand what their RTOs, the recovery time objectives, and the RPOs, the recovery point objectives, are for those customers so that we can really understand what solution fits your needs. There's also a budget that's going to come into play as you go from the bottom left to the top right. As the fully managed comes into play and the more aggressive RPOs come into play, then you're going to see a higher cost associated with that. So just kind of understand that as you go from the bottom left where you've got Rescue 360, Basic and Advanced, the Quick Ship, that's going to be your entry-level point into a disaster recovery solution. That's where we box up hardware, we ship it to you. It's going to have a typically close to a week recovery time objective, and your recovery point's probably going to be at least that, if not maybe a little bit more, because you're going to have some additional downtime prior to the disaster occurring, or the last backups will occur some period of time prior to the disaster occurring. So recognize that as you go all the way up into the top right where I talked about Power Cloud and the data replication there, to the replication solutions where you're replicating, whether it's a Mimics, Itera, or high availability with an SRM, maybe even backup recovery appliance aware disk array to do data replication. I think of an Exagrid or a Quantum type device in that area where you're aware of the backup recovery application, you're storing the data, and you're able to replicate it off-site. I guess I should kind of pause here real quick. If you have any questions, feel free to submit them through the WebEx so that we can bring those up at the end as I go through this. And if I touch on something that maybe I'm not clear on or you want additional information on, I'll be happy to come back to it. So feel free to submit those in, and the moderator will bring those forward at the end. So really, this is the foundation of the evolution of disaster recovery for our customers. As customers went from tape-based recovery to now we want to do data replication. And quite frankly, I'm not a huge fan of the word cloud, because cloud on the other end, there still is hardware, there still is infrastructure, there still is a need for resources. So when we present this up here, I'm not going to bring up a whole lot of the phrase cloud. I'm going to talk more around, data replication to dedicated infrastructure on our floor. And really that's what the cloud is that you've got somebody owning the infrastructure, providing it to you, leveraging network connectivity to get to that infrastructure to give you resiliency and recovery capability offsite. So as you look at this slide, you'll notice I kind of broke it into two sides. Obviously, you've got your production data center, and on the other side, you have some sort of recovery center. We call it a high availability center. Dedicated infrastructure could be infrastructure that you already own, or infrastructure that we would provide to you to pre-stage your data. This infrastructure can be anything from an I-series to a VTL to a disk array to servers, warm servers, whether they're Intel or Power, already on our floor that you're doing continuous data replication to, or periodic data replication to it. This can be provided as a rack space. So rack space as a service. You already own the infrastructure. You need 10 U of rack space. You want to put your own gear here. You want to do your replication to it. That's as easy as us providing you ping, power, and pipe. Again, our rack space as a service is not intended to be a production colo facility. It is purely intended to be a recovery co-location or recovery data replication option. What this does, though, is it allows you to leverage existing hardware that you have that you're waiting to depreciate off the books and get your return on the investment of it. Maybe you've got an older disk array that you've decided you're not ready to sunset it and throw it out, but you're trying to figure out how to leverage that. That would make sense here. Or you're saying, you come to us and say, hey, I need you to provide me systems and data to be able to do, or systems and disks to be able to do data replication to. So that's really what the dedicated piece of it. The second piece here, shared recovery hardware tied to an SLA. This is the gear that we provide at time of disaster. This is, again, anything from disks to network components to tape drives to maybe even a whole mainframe there. I mean, we have access to the mainframe systems. We've got 2 of them on our floor as we speak now. So customers have looked at that replication stack, chosen what layers of the replication stack they want to replicate at, and they've brought their data over to us. So whether that's a Commvault replication, TSM replication, when you look at that backup recovery application layer, those are all viable ways to get your data off-site. Even a VTL, you may already be writing to a VTL, you put in another one on the other side and do a VTL-based data replication. So what's really important to understand here, and as vague as this document kind of seems like it might be, it gives you the complete flexibility, or us the complete flexibility, to whiteboard a solution that fits your needs. And I say that because the first thing I want to do is leverage existing technologies that you have on your floor to determine how do we do data replication to give you that recovery time, recovery point that you're looking for. That really drives cost down. I'm not walking in and going, hey, we're going to replace your entire backup recovery infrastructure. I'm not coming in going, your disk array doesn't work, we need to throw that out. We're trying to figure out how do we leverage your existing infrastructure to provide you a resilient solution on the other side. It's really what this image is. So we're going to go in a little bit deeper into some of the offerings specifically around this, but just keep this image in mind as a foundation for how do we do disaster recovery as a service.
And I might interject, folks, again, Steve Gruber here as the moderator, that what Tony is sharing with you is the ability to leverage your dedicated assets you already have, tying it to shared assets on the back end to make a complete solution, at the same time driving down costs. And that's really what we're here to achieve, is how do we build cost-effective resiliency for your infrastructure. And this is one way we do it. And Tony's had great success and his team working with organizations leveraging exactly what you saw in that slide deck, where we're using whatever disk technology or NAS technology you may already have, migrating that to a floor, and then tying both dedicated and shared assets. And again, we appreciate the fact that we've had great success in leveraging this solution, and Tony's been working in the team with a lot of organizations to implement this same solution. Tony?
Thanks, Steve. So on the backup as a service slide here, really we are partners, MSP partners, with both Veeam for the virtual infrastructure as well as Commvault for the full enterprise infrastructure, whether that's physical I-Series as well as virtual infrastructure. We have the capabilities of deploying agents and putting systems onto our customer's floor to be able to perform that backup and data storage locally, as well as do the offsite replication. In both of those scenarios, we can provide resources to do some basic monitoring of the backup and replication pieces and provide reports to make you aware of any issues or concerns that have come up during that recovery, or excuse me, during that backup process that may affect your ability to recover. So Power Cloud 360, this is our power infrastructure purely dedicated to I-Series and AIX, data replication and system recovery. Whether you want to do a warm standby I-Series and do Mimics data replication to it, and we have a partnership with Vision to be able to access Mimics at an OpEx cost versus a CapEx, and I guess I should have said that on the backup as a service piece as well. That's a key feature to that solution, is that it eliminates the CapEx for you. It allows you to do an OpEx for your backup and data replication piece. All of the solutions that we're talking about here too are primarily focused on OpEx cost. You know, there's some upfront one-time setup fees and implementation fees, but most of these solutions are going to be all at an OpEx, monthly recurring cost associated with them. That mentions here the IBM mainframe as well, the Z-Series. We have capabilities of leveraging data replication to the Z-Series, whether that's at a VTL or system level replication. We can carve up a VM to run here to keep it warm and give you that recovery resiliency on the mainframe as well. As I mentioned earlier, business continuity is key. That's a big component of our disaster recovery solution strategy. Understanding the aspects of your environment is really what's crucial to being able to determine how we implement and build and design a disaster recovery solution. And I'm an analogy person, so I'm going to pull this back and give you an analogy. You say you want to buy a house or you want to build a house. The first thing the builder is going to ask you is how many rooms, how big of a house, you know, what kind of exterior do you want it, all of the pieces that make up that house. You can't just walk in and say, give me a house, and not have any predetermined. You may not going to be able to afford a 50-bedroom house, but you may only need 2 bedrooms. It's really around customizing the solution to your needs, That's where this consulting group comes in. Maybe you don't know how many rooms in that house you really need, or that you want brick because it's easier to maintain than putting, you know, a siding on it, or these kinds of things. And that's where that consultant comes in to really help advise, provide guidance, direction, and evaluate the infrastructure that you have to determine what systems interconnect, what systems are crucial to come up first. Because in our flexibility of building these solutions, we have the capabilities of tiering the recovery options. So maybe we don't put a warm standby for your tier 3 applications that don't need to be up until day 4, day 5 in the event of a disaster. Those could come in from a VTL replication or even a tape-based recovery, because you're not as worried about them being up immediately. Identifying the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 applications, helping you break that down, that's exactly where this consulting group comes in, exactly what they do. So how do we do what we do? What's the back-end infrastructure from a hardware standpoint? We have access to $100 million worth of IT assets. The quick snapshot into the warehouses that we can pull hardware, that we get leverage to pull hardware into our facility for recovery at time of disaster. All of it is tested and evaluated. It's put together, it's brought onto the floor and connected up for you in the event of a disaster. This is one way that we help drive down costs. We don't keep all of our DR infrastructure in our data center on our floor spinning, blowing hot air, waiting for that disaster to occur. We have the access to it. Now, mind you, that doesn't mean that we don't have a large collection of hardware sitting on the floor. We just try to keep that hardware that's sitting on the floor blowing hot air to a minimum. It keeps our costs down, it keeps our operational costs down, but it also helps us keep our costs to our customers down so that we're able to give you a more cost-effective solution. Down on the bottom, as gears tested, boxed up, and prepared to ship out for time of disaster, it's tagged, it's checked, it's tracked, and you'll get a notification of when it's shipped and be able to identify that that gear is on its way to you. So it's kind of how we do what we do, so that you're not, you know, we're more than just talk. We do have the infrastructure, we do have the facilities, and we're happy to do tours and bring prospects in. Reference lists are available as well. I guess in this area as well as in the testing area, one thing I want to talk to, we've had quite a few recent wins from some of the other major carriers or DR providers where customers have come to us, and as each of those customers have done their first test with us, they've made very positive comments to us, letting us know that we're differentiating ourselves in the market with our professional services, our hands-on capability, our ability to be attentive to the customer's needs. Our engineers are available during your test. They're within arm's reach of you most of the time. Facility is not like a big, massive campus of buildings. We're tight-knit, we're close together, and all of our engineers are readily available, as are most of the account managers in the event of a test or a disaster. I mean, we're here to support you. I think that's truly a differentiator, because your success is our success. Your ability to be successful in the event of a disaster, in the event of a test, is really important to us. And when it comes to testing, I'll be flat out honest, not every test is a perfect success for every customer, but it's a learning process. So the next one they get stronger, we get stronger, and it's a team effort. We feel like we're part of your team. It's a collaborative effort to make sure that we're doing everything we can from a DR standpoint or a recovery standpoint to give you what you need to be successful in the event of a disaster. So I'm going to shift gears just a little bit, kind of talk less about rescue and what we do from a solution standpoint and an offering standpoint, and I'm going to shift over a little bit to how do you do this? How do you take advantage of data replication, cloud storage, offsite data protection to improve those recovery times? What have we done, Rescue and Chorus 360, what have we done to invest in our customers, to provide our customers those needs, or to meet those needs of our customers? So one thing that I think is really important to understand is we talked about the evolution and the growth of disaster recovery is Veeam calls it the 3-2-1 rule. Again, I mentioned we're an MSP with Veeam. We're a gold partner with Veeam. We're big on the Veeam solution stack and what its capabilities are. So the next couple slides here are going to be around Veeam, the virtual infrastructure. This is not to ignore physical infrastructure. It's not to ignore the I-Series and the mainframe. This is really just kind of to talk about most of our customers are virtualizing. Most everybody's made the decision, we're trying to get off physical systems. What does that mean from a DR standpoint, and how does Rescue separate itself and prepare for this. We've invested into the Veeam solution. We've invested into our Veeam infrastructure. You'll see here in the next couple of slides some of our Veeam offerings, but I think this slide here is critical to understand data protection, data recovery, offsite resiliency, and how we've eliminated tape or moved away from tape into higher recovery capabilities here. So Veeam's motto or rule, data protection rule, is the 3-2-1 rule. 3 copies of your data on 2 different physical medias and at least 1 copy offsite. So as you talk about data protection in the production environment, you've got your data stores, and specifically in the virtual infrastructure, you've got your data stores that are connected to your virtual hypervisors here, your virtual host infrastructure. When you do those backups, you want to store that on a disk array that's separate than your production disk array. Store that locally. That gives you full recovery capabilities local in your production environment without having to go to your offsite copy. You keep your reversions in there. You keep your retention in there. That is your first point of recovery in the event of a single file corruption, single point of failure, or single system failure. This recovery point may be for an entire rack that goes down, and your backup repository is in a separate rack and it's not affected. So now it's just a matter of getting more hardware in to be able to bring that up. The offsite piece of this is the disaster recovery piece of it. Should you have a catastrophic failure at your location, what are you going to do for recovery? Veeam's done a couple cool things with the data replication, and I'll talk about that. But really, that's where we've invested, and we've really separated ourselves. This is also very similar to the way that we do our Commvault solution. So everywhere that it says Veeam, you can imagine that being Commvault. We have that Commvault MSP. Maybe you're using Net Backup, maybe you're using TSM, maybe you're using some other product out there for your backup protection today. I think this 3-2-1 rule still applies to that. Just replace Veeam with whatever backup technology you have. The only one that I'm aware of that, and I shouldn't say the only one, the biggest challenge or the most common one out there is backup exec claims to be able to do some offsite data replication. My experiences, to Steve's point, in working with customers, and quite a few customers in this area, is it doesn't work quite as advertised. Now, that's not to say they're not improving it. It's not to say that it doesn't work at all. I don't own a backup exec license. I'm taking that from most of my customers' experiences that are using it. That's been a big pain point. Most of the other ones do have offsite data replication features built into them. The same rule could apply. I just chose Veeam here because of our MSP with them. So how did we, when I say we invested in Veeam, how did we set ourselves up with Veeam? How do we do the hypervisor-based replication? Why does this make sense from a virtual infrastructure protection? Why do you want to break Veeam away from, or your virtual machine backups away from that traditional legacy backup appliance? The major backup recovery software in the market was built for physical infrastructure and retrofitted to do virtual infrastructure. Veeam was built as a virtual machine backup and replication appliance first. Was not built to target the physical infrastructure, and that's why it separates itself in the virtual machine backup and data replication piece. So when you look at this, the Cloud Connect is an internal replication feature that Veeam has deployed in version 8, which came out in September. You can read through kind of the options or the benefits here. The key thing to understand, our repositories available. If you have Veeam at your site, you go into your production Veeam infrastructure and say, I want to replicate, or I want to copy my data off-site. You connect to our cloud infrastructure and you replicate that data straight across into our repository. We price this out on a per terabyte per month rate, and you're just basically putting your data off-site in the cloud or in our repository. Our repository is in Norcross, Georgia, so everything that we talked about from a recovery capability, hardware assets available at time of disaster, they're all still valid. We still have that infrastructure. That's what makes us unique. Amazon and Glacier and some of these other cloud providers are enabled to do this. I'm just going to call them out and say what it is. They just don't offer the same hardware availability features that we have. And then when we couple this with our physical infrastructure capabilities as well for the customers that have iSeries mainframe or even some physical tape that they're still leveraging as they go from that physical to virtual P2V, their infrastructure, we can accommodate both. And this is really important to to understand there. So what does the Veeam Cloud Connect provide you? How does that improve recovery time? With the Cloud Connect, you're looking at a backup copy only. You're taking a copy of your data on a nightly or every 12 hours, at midnight and at noon, let's just say, you back it up locally from the production storage to the primary backup storage, and then on some periodic basis, it could be every few hours, you're going to tell Veeam to make a copy of it offsite. Veeam's not going to transmit anything if the copy is already current offsite, but this helps you keep it in sync. It's leveraging an SSL communication. You don't have to bring in a VPN pipe or anything like that. You just leverage the direct internet access you already have at your facility. Assuming you have a certain level of Veeam software purchased on the production side, you may be able to leverage the WAN acceleration. This will dramatically drive down that replication or data copy timeline. In the event of a disaster, what does this mean? Obviously, hardware needs to be stood up. You've got to have resources to run your virtual infrastructure. Install ESX, install the Veeam software, and then begin doing Veeam virtual machine restores from the Veeam server. The Veeam server is going to communicate directly with the cloud repository. The cloud repository is on our floor. The recovery infrastructure is going to be on our floor as well. You've got LAN speed data recovery, full system recovery on our floor. At time of disaster, then it just becomes a matter of changing the network translation so that your production and users are landing on our floor versus hitting a site that doesn't exist at your previous production site, assuming it's a full-scale disaster. And the recovery times and recovery points associated with that are going to be in the hours. There's still going to be a little bit of time associated with that, and that's where this next solution really comes into play. If you're looking for something that's tighter than hours and you need more immediate failover and more faster system recovery, then you're going to be looking at what I call the Veeam Replication solution. This is really about providing faster recovery for those virtual machines. Veeam has the 15-minute RTPO, recovery time point objective, really drives down your cost for recovery and your timeline for recovery, because now what we're going to do in this solution is we're going to dedicate a blade on our infrastructure here on our floor that's going to be dedicated to you. It's going to be yours for testing, data replication, and system recovery. The way that this would work is you're going to install ESX or Hyper-V on it. You're going to have Veeam at your production infrastructure. You're going to have a virtual machine running Veeam here on our floor. Your Veeam servers will communicate to each other. They'll be aware of each other. Then the trick here is you will need a VPN, an IPsec tunnel, or a point-to-point MPLS type device, tunnel, excuse me, with network termination gear in order to provide that communication. It does, at this point, Veeam's not leveraging the SSL for this, and this is a replica feature. This is going to have more frequent data transmission. It's going to be more network and bandwidth intensive because you're not just doing a backup copy, you're actually doing replicas. So when you set up a replica on the production side to say, hey, keep this data, continuously protect this system, this virtual machine, Veeam's constantly capturing the changes to that system based off the frequency that you set up to it. And it's replicating or copying replicating that data across to the DR site. That's critical to understand, because now you've introduced that 15-minute RTPO versus being in hours. Now you're in minutes. So there's a huge difference between having that dedicated server here and leveraging our cloud repository server here. In the event of a disaster here, you already have a footprint on our floor. You already have network connectivity to that footprint on our floor. When you're ready to declare a disaster or do a system full-scale recovery, we're going to provide additional virtual machine resources to that host environment that you have present on our floor, and you're just going to start building those virtual machines, bringing those virtual machines up. We'll provide additional faster disk if we need to. The cloud repository disk for the Veeam cloud repository is just SATA disk, and this solution you have an option of choosing, I want to have SATA or I want to have SAS. The reason you may want to have SAS drives there, or flash for that matter, faster drives there, is if you did have to fail over, if you did have to run this as production and you couldn't afford the wait to do that restore and then the data migration from a SATA to a SAS environment. You can run it on SATA, but it's not going to, may not give you the performance that you desire for your production environment in the event of a disaster. So we drive down costs by leveraging SATA because it's a good product. It's solid for data repository. It's getting cheaper by the day. It doesn't require any data physical media transmission. So when we talk about cloud repository, the step up from tape is slow spinning disk. Perfect example is the SATA drive sitting there storing that data. Running full-blown production probably doesn't make the most sense to run it off a SATA environment, but it does, you know, bridge a gap to getting you to SaaS if that's the path you want to go. It helps drive down costs because we understand that from an environment or from a production, from a business model, disaster recovery can be a challenge as you go up for approvals and try to get capital expense and OpEx spending to buy in. Until really an executive has experienced a disaster, you have to be able to articulate and present the risk associated with it. Again, that's where that consulting group can come in and help you drop that in, or provide that infrastructure, or that evidence to provide that discussion point. So really, Veeam for us, and again, you could almost change some of these to say Commvault, you can change them to say TSM, you could change them to say Net Backup, but we are seeing a huge groundswell with Veeam and where it's headed in the market, and really feel like it's an industry leader, and it's changing where the disaster recovery is going in the future, and that's why I spent 5 slides here talking just purely about that Veeam stuff, or Veeam replication piece. So what I want to do is just jump back real quick on the Veeam piece here, talk about the difference between the Cloud Connect and the data replication. Why would a customer want to invest in having that dedicated system on our floor versus just maybe going Cloud Connect? And it's really around those RTPOs, those recovery point, recovery time objectives. If you're looking for hours, Cloud Connect probably makes perfect sense. If you're looking for minutes, then you're looking more for that data replication piece. And if you're looking for seconds, we have another option out there. In the virtualized infrastructure, it's Zerto. In the physical infrastructure, it's going to get interesting because there's not a whole lot of products out there that'll do physical infrastructure, continuous data protection down into the seconds. Double take maybe the closest thing out there that I'm aware of that really jumps into that area. So when we talk about building a solution, and I talked about understanding the requirements and understanding how we get to the end solution, that RTPO is critical, recovery time, recovery point is critical, but it's also really a budget piece that comes into play too. I mean, making sure that the cost associated with the faster recovery times can be accommodated. I guess the last thing here is you see the recovery process at the bottom. I mean, the differences between Cloud Connect and the data replication, pretty significant. This is true with anything. If you wanted to replace Cloud Connect with VTL environment and say data replication or dedicated replication with high availability data replication, think of them similar, because in the Cloud Connect you just have copies of your backup data offsite available. You don't have any hardware or systems pre-staged, whereas with dedicated infrastructure you're really able to have a point of presence on the recovery center floor prior to a disaster. So with that, I've kind of run through the larger list of the slides here just real briefly. Here's a list of some of our existing customers that whether they're reference accounts, most of these are reference accounts. A lot of them have been long-term customers of ours that we have a very good, solid relationship with. In fact, a lot of these customers have been very recently in the last, in this year, doing disaster recovery testing. I can tell you all of them have been successful this year, so we've had a very good track record with these customers coming in and really building solutions for these customers and any of our customers, really. This is just kind of a quick list of the ones that we have, or some of the bigger marquee names that we have. So I want to leave with this last slide here. Rescue services, we talked a lot. It's kind of all over the place, from hardware, system recovery, capabilities, people. These are the 3 pillars of rescue services and disaster recovery in our eyes. Data, how do you protect your data? What are you doing to give yourself access to your data in the event of a disaster to meet the the recovery times that you have. Systems, where do you put that data in the event of a disaster? You can put all the data offsite in the cloud that you want to, but if you don't have a plan or a testable process for being able to pull that data down to the systems to be able to do recovery on it and validate it, it's just data outside of your facility somewhere. It may not be usable, it may be usable, it just may take you a long time to get to it. So we think data and systems are very integral, crucial pieces of any disaster recovery plan, but testing it and tying it together, because that's really what you get when you test. Does my data and do my data and my systems match up in the event of a disaster? And then obviously the people. Where do you go? Where do your end users go? Where do your system admins go? Your executives go in the event of a disaster? How do they access the infrastructure? How do they continue to operate? You can have all the data recovered to all the systems in the world, but if you don't have people to be able to access it and make the business run, or somewhere for the people to go, your end users to go, then you still got a challenge, and those are all key pieces to any recovery strategy. And they're all factors into how we build and how we craft solutions for our customers.
Thank you, Tony. I'd like just to share with our audience a few things. Again, hopefully you can see how there's pieces and parts of what we presented today that you can leverage in your infrastructure, in your company and organization, and leverage those to help build you a more resilient strategy without breaking the bank. I've been in the DR space for the last 25 years, and the one thing that I will tell you year after year that I hear is we need a disaster recovery plan. And the first question is, do you have a defined recovery strategy? And typically the answer is no. And then you can't have a strategy until the business has come up with the requirements. What needs to be recovered when, based on the application, what the end user needs at their desktop. So it all has to flow together. There has to be requirements from your business. There has to be from that. You can articulate what we're going to use for recovery, and then develop a strategy, and then move into the actual documentation of that strategy. I will say for you on the phone and for the team, you know, today the world is much different. Back 25 years ago, it was tape-based recovery only, and then about 15, 16 years ago, double take came along, kind of changed the Intel landscape with high availability for Intel, and now it's really confusing, and there's just a lot of smoke to have to kind of sift through to really get to the right solution. There are all different single point solutions, from Zerto to Veeam to Exagrid to you name it, SimpliVity. So you've got a tough job trying to really work through what's best for my environment, what's most cost effective, and really what do I take to our executive committee to roll forward with that I can bet my business at time of disaster that we're going to be able to recover. We're always viewed as insurance. I think that's one thing I have to say, is that year after year we're spending money for insurance. Well, picture us as, and I like to use the analogy, we're the term insurance provider versus the whole life. So our pricing model is affordable. It's inverse of the traditional DR players out there and the providers out there. So ours is a utility-based model. You pay for what you use when you use it. I think it's kind of a novel idea, because that's the way DR should be, just like you pay for your utilities at your home or your apartment or condo or townhouse. So we've got affordability built into our solutions. At the same time, experience. I mean, if you look at the experience we have, and if Tony's point earlier about the gateway into Course 360 with our people, our technology, and us on the rescue side, we're always solving business problems with resiliency, technology, and people, and that's what Course 360 is about. There's no other DR provider out there that can do what we do and bring all three elements of technology, resiliency, and people together and help you solve your business problems. I'd like to thank our Raleigh office, again, the host and those that promoted this event today. They're there for you, and as we continue to expand in our Mid-Atlantic states presence, please feel free to reach out to them for more information, or you'd like to schedule some time with Tony or anyone on our team, on the rescue team. I know that a lot of you, as I mentioned earlier, have extremely busy schedules. We're always trying to do more with less, but appreciate you hanging in there with us. We'd like to kind of move this over into our question and answer session. And I know as the presentation went on, I saw some questions roll in here, and Liz has been kind enough to write them out and hand them to me. And they're not in any kind of order, Tony, but I'm going to let you kind of answer these questions. And the first one says, do you work with companies who have their own recovery space in a colo?
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely do, whether it's quick shipping gear into that customer because they don't want to continue to invest in resources to keep gear spinning at the colo, to just general advice or guidance around what technologies and what systems we see that are working in other scenarios with other customers. I mean, it can be more of a consulting, or potentially where we could quick ship gear to that colo facility for tier 2 apps or systems that aren't sitting there in a warm standby. It'll help drive costs down for the customer so they don't have a bunch of gear sitting there that they have to maintain waiting for the disaster that they don't need until day 3 or day 4. Obviously, high availability gear that's pre-staged at the colo is hard to do any sort of quick ship with, as I talked about. But yeah, I mean, there's options there. We do work with customers that do exactly that.
Next question is, how often should we be testing our DR solution, and how often do your customers typically test?
Honestly, most customers don't test at all, but of the majority of the ones that test, it's once a year. Some of them do it twice a year. It really depends on the customer preference, the CIO's direction or leadership's direction for that company to say, I have to know that I'm fully recoverable and I've got to be ready at any given time. So they may want to test 2 or 3 times a year to customers that went, well, we tested successfully last year and nothing's changed in the environment. We've decided that we're going to hold off and we won't test again until 18 months later. So that's where our model is very beneficial for customers to be able to test a la carte when they choose to, versus having to feel like they're on a strict schedule to have to test every month, or excuse me, every year. Or if they don't use that test time, they lose that revenue or that money. So, I mean, it's really up to each business, but most of our customers test once a year.
Antonio, let me just ad-lib a little bit here. I do know that as our testing schedule continues to fill in, and we perform tests, and you and the team work with organizations performing tests. How many total organizations do you think test a year with us?
Yeah, it's probably in the neighborhood of about 40, plus or minus, but we've got quite a few that are consistent recurring customers that test every year. We've got a few that come in and test twice. So really, right now, I'd say it's about 40 unique customers.
And I think what's important for our listeners is the fact that, and those participating today, is the fact that we learn a lot from those that test, because we get to see what works, what doesn't work so well, and Tony and the team are able to take that back and as they're architecting solutions, make sure that they avoid some of the snafus or problems that are created with some of the different technologies that folks are using out there. So I think it's important to note that. All right, let me get back to the questions. Do you have resources to help us write recovery procedures for our recovery of our production environment?
Yes, absolutely. Whether it's engineers to work with your sysadmins or your technical leads to build the plans around how to do keystroke, to consultants to do business analysis, to do the business disaster recovery piece as well.
Thanks, Tony. Another question is, do you have to be a customer of yours to perform a DR test with your equipment?
No, absolutely not. As I spoke to earlier about the proof of concept piece, or do a one-off statement of work for a test prior to signing a contract. So I mean, we have quite a few customers that have done an initial test prior to becoming a recurring customer with us, a recurring long-term customer with us. So whether it's we ship gear to them or they come here and do testing, obviously it would be difficult to do some data replication with testing as a POC for that, but purely from a disk or tape-based recovery or a quick ship type recovery option, yeah, that's easy. We do have POC options for the Veeam Cloud Connect, because it's a pretty straightforward solution and setup. We would have some difficulties around doing POCs for a dedicated blade and doing maybe the Commvault, because we do have such a heavy requirement of what's deployed with those pieces. But we work with a lot of prospects to do POCs around DR prior to signing a contract with us.
And here's a question. Your presentation seemed to be centered around IT only. Do you also have people that can assist with business continuity?
Yeah, I mean, the consulting group is both technical as well as business continuity, focused on the end users and the how the business can come back online. So absolutely.
Okay. Well, that's all the questions. Liz, any more? Nope. She's shaking her head no. So those are the questions we received from all those who participated today. I, again, would like to thank those of you who joined us, and it's always interesting to talk about disaster recovery and business continuity. At the same time, this business is always evolving. Again, the challenges we faced in many cases 15 years ago are not the same challenges we face today. I know that getting funding for disaster recovery and business continuity, since we are viewed as insurance typically, is sometimes pretty tough. But just think about Course 360 as we close, and the fact that with our resiliency and our technology and people practices, we're here to help you and assist anyway with problems that you have in your business and overcoming objectives that you may have. So again, thanks to our audience. Thanks again for joining us. Please stay tuned. We have these webinars on a regular basis. And any questions, feel free to reach out directly to Tony Klinger in our